Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Amazing podcast. I'm Twain Taylor, editor at Amazing, and want to encourage you to check out all that we have, put up all of the content on our website, amazic.com. That's AMAZIC.com. You'll find a lot more conversations just like the one we're going to have today on the topic of Kubernetes, cloud native, DevOps, and related ideas. So if you work in this space, you'll definitely want to catch up on all of our conversations because we speak to some of the leaders and innovators in this space who are really building cutting edge software tools and bringing it to market. And that's what we're going to do today as well. And the topic of today is going to be about developer platforms. I have with me Rajesh Razdan, who is the co-founder at Devtron. That's Devtron. So yeah, it's great to be talking about developer platforms today, and it's great to have you with us, Rajesh. How are you doing?
Thank you, Twain. Thank you for having me here. Lovely to be here and quite excited to talk to you about various stuff, all developer productivity platforms and cloud native.
All right. So really excited to get started and hear about what you've been building and just your views on this space that we're in. But before we get into the the meat of it, I want to just get to know you a bit and ask about what you've done and how you became founder at Devtron. Were you already before this into founding startups, exiting, and then this is another, or was this your first time? Could you tell us a bit about your story?
Well, of course, happy to share that as well. I've been privileged to have started another company before this. I spent my initial 10 plus years selling large enterprise software, largely around the telecoms area. I was with Nokia, Ericsson's, and we used to sell uh, enterprise grade, very large scale, complex software systems to build telecom networks worldwide. And in 2007, I became an entrepreneur for the first time, almost accidentally, where my first startup, which was called M Carbon, literally bootstrapped and built it out of India, grew it to about 200 plus people. And then we used to do business with a lot of telcos around prepaid markets, and we used to sell solutions around usage and retention, value-added services, and all things around increasing the usage of prepaid economy type of use cases where you have very less average revenue per user, and how do you get users to spend more on the networks and get more value-added services by virtue of using a combination of solutions and products, which mCarbon used to develop. So I built that over for about 7.5, 8 years, raised a bunch of funds. And then in 2018, we got acquired by Nuance Communications, was large US-based conglomerate, which is now part of Microsoft. So, that was my beginning of the entrepreneurial journey. And then I happened to obviously partake in a lot of entrepreneurship and builder activity by being angel investor in many companies, part of some LPs, limited, as an LP in some of these early stage funds, where the idea was to actually get a ringside view of what people are building, because building one company sort of put blinkers on your heads, and you are deeply entrenched with doing that. And Devtron happened as a part of discovery of that new use cases in 2019 when I met my two other co-founders, Prashant and Nishant, who came from a background of, they were first time entrepreneurs. They were building use cases around cloud native. They were the first who dirtied their hands with Kubernetes, and that's when I joined them, and we created a little more enhanced version of Devtron, and we'll talk about that, what that is. And we came together and sort of, this is a meeting of minds of combination of product, tech, commercial side of three different individuals, and we said that this is, being cloud native is a very interesting and a large enough problem, because people were transitioning from VMs to cloud. People were also transitioning in their heads from dealing with a lot of tooling. Kubernetes came, I mean, Google released Kubernetes in 2014, 15. That was the time where people were dirtying their hands with it and finding it very complex. So when we decided to delve into it, we decided that let's go deeper into it, and sort of that becomes our a reason for existence, so if you will, and we will build a company around that. And we sort of did a research on how many people were doing that, what are the problems they were facing, and especially who are the users of our system, and how do we solve for simplification of a normal SDLC, software development lifecycle, and can we take a stab at simplifying those. So I think there were various users, like there were developers, and then there were platform engineers, infrastructure engineers, DevOps, all have very siloed roles in large organizations. And a lot of us being techies ourselves, and we have coded and we have built software systems, we also had a first-hand experience of things getting broken, things getting dropped off within these silos. And we said that can we create an integrated glue where we can bring all of these things together and sort of build a totally new way of building and deploying software. And that was the building block of Devtron. And that's how it started in 2019. So that's the kind of backstory.
Interesting, interesting. And are you guys bootstrapped or do you have funding?
So we were bootstrapped until 2 years back. And, as a matter of fact, in 22, we raised almost very quickly 2 rounds. We raised a series, pre-seed or a pre-series A round with Leo Capital. And then we immediately, within 6-7 months, we raised Series A from a New York-based fund called Insight Partners. So we are Series A funded, and this we raised in 22.
Right, all right. Neat. So I want to start talking about our concept for today, which is developer platforms, or call it platform engineering. It's been definitely one of the hot topics in recent years in this space. And the word platform gets thrown around a lot, and different people mean different things when they use the word. So I want to get us started with having you explain how would you define a platform, a developer platform specifically? What would it look like? What would it do? And talk to us a bit about uh, what was the traditional idea uh, of platforms and how it has changed to what it is today.
I think the whole it's a good question, because the whole platform and building blocks of SDLCs from legacy to modernism has been around the concept of dev and ops, which is DevOps. Like, it was typically people used to do, I mean, these words were not very nuanced a few years back, and now they are kind of siloed in that sense, because people have gone into very specific niches of what each function does. So today's, I mean, as the word suggests, platform is not, doesn't seem to be a vertical function. Platform is more like a horizontal function. And
Mhm.
with various agents sitting on this platform doing various different tasks. Now, platform engineering is a modern way of looking at DevOps in the second phase or the third phase, where we are saying that how did the name DevOps how did the name DevOps come into pictures? It was dev and ops, and we said the operationalizing, setting up infrastructure, setting up environments, etc., is more operationally intensive job. And that is where people have been tasked with certain types of tasks. And then the main developers who are agnostic about what really happens on the infrastructure, they're more bothered about building that application, coding, testing, QA, and putting them into production. And what happens in production, how then application or a particular type of code, whichever language that you've written, how it behaves in infrastructure, how do you allocate it resources, how do you deploy it at scale, etc. There are, as you scale your systems, as you scale your use case, whatever the type of use case you might have, there are other challenges. So that's why at scale, these challenges became very nuanced, and different names began to drive up. So instead of just being one role which used to do everything else, people said that things have become complex. And with the introduction of new sort of concepts around the build, deploy, debug, um, QA, etc., pre-prod, prod, all of these terms became important as you were defining modern ways of deploying, building, and sort of deploying software. So platform became more important. Now, DevOps and platform engineering are kind of, in a way, very synchronous with each other, but platform engineering has made it more nuanced. And we're saying that platform takes the center stage. And this is a modern ways of more efficient ways of defining what your roles is. Is there a better way as a DevOps engineer? Can I do my job more efficiently? Is there a learning from the system that is available so that I don't have to reinvent the wheel? So a lot of people started to look into all of those things. While developers had the hypothesis or have the hypothesis, I am not really bothered about the deployment side of new things that are coming, whether I'm deploying or building on Jenkins, I'm building on Argo or deploying through Argo CD, whether it's Kubernetes or not, where's the containerization process? The talk about pre-containerization era, which is still very prevalent in many parts of the world. And then there's the whole microservices architecture revolution, etc., which brought about the whole containerization revolution, orchestration, the terms like orchestration, Kubernetes, etc., serverless. I think those became very opinionated as well as very declarative as well. That people, and this area became very opinionated. I came with a certain best practices, my way of doing things, and I said, I implored that, hey, we should do things in a certain way. So, and then there was a whole generation of open source coming in, a lot of tooling coming in. So people, there was no regulation per se. There was not a central body like in the telecoms otherwise. When we build software, there is ETSI and there is IEEE, etc. You write certain frameworks and it sort of defines a certain regulation in there with the way you should. In software, it was pretty much open. In platform engineering, people started to build their own silos. So I think that's where the platform word came in, and then the new ways of dealing with platform as was sort of conceptualized, looking at two things, modularity and scale at picture. And then this also became, the whole platform also became a play of interfaces, right? Because there are too many interfaces, APIs, etc., in the software integration landscape that we deal with, the build and the deploy process. So platform engineering was a step, or is rather a step of dealing with defining those interfaces at one level, and what is the best way the users interface with these predefined interfaces, and are they or could they be made available in a single pane of glass or a single system where I could get access, and then would I then therefore be responsible for doing what I'm doing, and others can also have a look at what I'm doing, and the learning can be fast. I don't have to depend on unstructured way of building software. I could actually somehow be dependent on a codified system, for example. So that's the ultimate benchmark of building platforms. People also call it internal development platforms, IDPs. People call it different names like platform engineering. It's a reincarnation of same principles of SDLCs, but built on the tenets of developer productivity as a concept, uh, efficiency of DevOps or platform engineers or infrastructure engineers at the get-go. And underlying it is a bunch of systems which are doing different tasks. And we are seeing that can these things be connected together? Because unfortunately, since there is no regulated body, it doesn't come from one single source. It comes from various different peoples who have taken their own opinionated views and tried to put them under a platform, and hoping that the world at large will sort of listen to this and start using it, and then get benefit out of it. So that's like a little bit more like philosophical ways of, but more commonsensical ways of, and very simplified ways of building some of these things. And Devtron has also taken a leaf out of this book by saying that we will, for example, focus on developer productivity as a plank, developer efficiency as a plank, and we will cut the tool sprawl and the whole, we will assist the whole shift left process in the SDLC, where we're seeing that let's simplify things at get-go. Let's try and uncomplicate so many tools that have been built, and let's look at things from a single pane of glass, more from a horizontal section where we're saying, and the building juice was that let's not create everything from ab initio, or let's not reinvent the wheel. If there have been open source stuff that has already been done, for example, and that was the genesis of building Devtron as an open source initially, when we said that let's look at how Argo CD has been built, how Flux CD has been built, Argo workflows have been built, and let's build an abstraction or a far simplified layer on top of it from build systems and deploy systems. And can we then abstract everything out, especially from a Kubernetes lens point of view, and then build a horizontal layer where both developers, DevOps, platform engineers, infrastructure engineers can all be looking at a same lens, single pane of glass, and are able to do their tasks independently and closely together as well. With obviously guardrails being built, roles being defined so that you're not jumping onto each other's shoes. You have well-defined roles based on, RBACs, role-based access controls, etc., so that there is no breakage points at each sections. SecOps is taken care of. Guardrails and compliances are very well taken care of. And at the same time, people are looking at Kubernetes, for example, as a black box. I don't need to know Kubernetes. I don't need to learn Kubernetes somehow. Is that even possible? Can I abstract all of this information and not having to learn kubectl commands, not having to go out to the terminal, not having to manage kube configs or see what is really coming in the Kubernetes releases as CNCF releases them? Can all of this be simplified in a simple platform, irrespective of whether I'm building my startup or I'm part of a large bank, anything and everything? If I'm building cloud native or I'm thinking of going into cloud native, Devtron can both be a good starting point for folks to move into Kubernetes, or if you're already on Kubernetes, you can manage your stuff on Kubernetes through Devtron, through this platform called Devtron. So I think this kind of summarizes the way of philosophically where we're coming from, platform engineering, how this all comes from play. And this is because since we came from that journey, we also realized that this needs to change and this needs to come at a common layer. And that's what we have built, and we are improvising on that build process. And as we put more features, functionalities, use cases onto Devtron's newer versions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wow, that was quite a detailed response where you touched on the pain points in the space, a bit of the history and background behind it, and even ventured into talking about the different solutions and even your approach to dealing with all of these challenges. And yeah, that was really interesting. I want to dig a little deeper and ask about, you mentioned tool sprawl many times, and I want to ask if you could give us some examples or even some of the real world implications of tool sprawl, something that developers would face on a day-to-day basis that hinders their productivity that you mentioned. Could you give us some examples so it hits home for people who are watching, listening to this?
Right. So by tool sprawl, let's go back again to when we were building Devtron. We were very clear. I mean, pre-Devtron, we were also building software through different tools, right? Most of us and many of the folks who are listening or who are building software build through common build systems, and then you have deploy systems. Like in build system, which is CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous deployment parlance, we call it CI systems, and build systems like your Jenkins.
Mhm.
The whole world's, and then there are various versions of Jenkins. A lot of companies, Jenkins is open source. A lot of companies have built services around Jenkins, etc. Now, and then on deploy side, there are tools like Argo CD, Flux CD, Argo Workflows, which is Circle CI.
Mhm.
So there are tons of tools, and these are all real names. And people, Jenkins is a very popular build system. Argo CD is a very popular deploy system. Flux CD
Mhm.
is a popular, relatively lesser popular deploy system. So there are a bunch of such things. And then people also use, and I'll throw a bunch of names, right? People are building uh, somewhat on Backstage. People are using Spinnaker. People are using, and these are all different versions. Like Spinnaker came out of Netflix, as we know, right? I mean, people were building something, they saw it's an interesting way, and then they sort of open sourced it, etc. So people use various tools at various levels that are available, and which sort of suits their temperament, their knowledge, and the build radius that they have, or the radius
Mhm.
of work that they have. Now, they all start with that, but as the technologies change and the world evolves to more complexity, your use cases, when now, for example, earlier you were just deploying at your premises and a data center, then you started to deploy on the cloud. Then as you were growing companies, and I'm talking about ISVs, independent software vendors, as you were deploying, then there was a requirement. The client said, hey, it cannot only be deployed at like a SaaS. I have a huge requirement of data localization. I'm worried about the data. I'm worried about the access that you have to my software or my data. How do you ensure that? So all of these were user requirements, and that shifted the way the build and deploy systems were behaving in the first generation of requirements. The second generation, and the, I would say, generational shift of these use cases, because these are complex things, and people say, hey, I will build data resiliency and data localization. I need my own cloud instance, or AWS or Google or a Microsoft Azure instance. I need to build this on a data center. I don't even need a cloud. I need to build everything on bare metal, for example. I want to have now a hybrid system where I want to also have multiple cloud providers and some homegrown stuff. So think about the complexities of a mere cloud, and then whole the complexities of deployment has taken. And these are all business use cases, right? I mean, I'm deploying as a for example, as a McDonald's, I have to now deploy software to all the outlets, for example, globally in the world, etc. So all of these, an outlet in Minnesota will have a very different footfall than something in the Bay Area, because they're different, they're very local. Now, the local compute, local things, the software that I'm deploying as a vendor who's supporting McDonald's, for example, will have very different requirements. That's one example. Let's say I'm deploying to a government buyer or a government agency, like in India, we have Aadhaar, UADI. We deal with federal requirements quite a bit in US, example, US Air Force, Department of Defense, etc. They also have software needs, and they also need people to deploy software to their premises or their cloud, whichever the infrastructure or their infrastructure or their environment. They will have a very different ask that, hey, I will have a completely different deployment scenario where it will be air gapped. You will have very limited access to access controls. How do I deploy? Because it's not SaaS. I'm not writing into software through a secure channel all the time. They will have just-in-time access. They will have very restricted access. Somebody will say that, hey, my deployment is all on-prem. I don't deploy it on SaaS at all because I want data to be always there. So there are various requirements, various challenges around some of these independent tools that people initially started with. So that's why this whole, as requirements became more nuanced, some of the traditional tools were not fit to suit the bill. For example, Jenkins is very old school in that sense. It's still a very primitive build system, but it doesn't really cater to the new age use cases. And that's why people started to move to Kubernetes, or people started to move into more advanced versions of, for example, deployments or strategies around deployments. And at this stage, I would also like to bring about the recent CrowdStrike Microsoft fiasco, right? I mean, all of this CrowdStrike fiasco more than Microsoft fiasco, where
Mhm.
there have been whole different. CrowdStrike is a massive company, right? Thousands of engineers, very well regarded, continues to be a security leader worldwide. Now, there are various hypotheses on, again, what could have gone wrong. Did people not test enough? What release channels or release strategies that they use? And people started talking about now within the deployment nuance, or a certain tool can do or not do. Again, is a good example of tool sprawl. For example, a lot of people said that, hey, they should have deployed on canaries as a canary deployment. We have various deployment strategies. In Devtron, we support Canary, we support rolling, we support blue green, etc. These are all deployment strategies. Now, as a platform, I should give exposure to all these strategies rather than having to choose my opinion at, hey, you have only one available, choose it or leave it. So this is one example of various tools having limitations on various types, or various tools which are only open source. Then it's at the help and at the mercy of its contributors and other things, all open source. And it does not get the real life use cases of how you are building enterprise grade software, because the DNA of that platform was restricted to the mercy of the contributors or the developers who are just behind that to suit their own blast radius or suit their own, sphere of influence. They were not
Mhm.
looking at people at large, whether it's enterprise or high growth startups, to build software. So that's an example of tool sprawl. We explained
Okay.
various tools that are being available, and how, as a transition from platform engineering as a concept or IDP as a concept, is the next version of that, where you're looking at interfaces, where you're looking at different strategies, where you're looking at various deployment types, including on-prem, just in time, not just SaaS, and trying to say that, hey, if I'm building software to all of these use cases, is my platform or my tool
Mhm.
ready enough to embrace all of this? And two, is this modular enough to not just say, hey, this is all, I have to undo everything that I was doing, for example, on Jenkins on a single day. Can I use a system? Can I only use deploy from a platform A versus a build of platform B? Can this all be modularly constructed so that I don't have to rip and replace overnight?
Mhm.
Because all of these should be a building block of making what is a futuristic, modular, robust platform should look like, which should immediately conform to the resilient needs of business. All of
Mhm.
these aspects of, foundational building blocks were kept in mind as we were building Devtron. And it's arguably, I mean, that's why we kept, and that is where I want to double down on some of these things, that we kept the kernel as open source, where we said that this is built on top of the open source versions of Argos and everything else as a layer on top. Things that you don't find there, will you find here? Absolutely, yes. And second, then we have also built enterprise grade features that are part of our commercial enterprise or enterprise type features, where we give SLAs, where we give you additional features, and we build
Mhm.
to suit a particular customer's need. So instead of having 12 tools, can you reduce that to 3, 4, 5, or a single eventually, is the whole idea. And at the same time, as you reduce this whole tool sprawl to more minimized set of tools, are you getting empowered and are you getting restricted to only using few tools? In the sense, is the tool that you're using restricted your growth or restricted your interfacing capabilities with newer technologies? If that is not an answer, if it is more adaptable, it's more API driven, it's more flexible, then that's a good foundational block to see that tomorrow, if I'm bringing more AI based models, deployment models, I'm bringing more complexities because of AI ML ops. Can I then embrace that as well? Is the tool ready to take that challenge as well? And I think that's the whole genesis of Devtron, and that's what we encourage, that it sort of transitions from what a modern looking foundational tool or a platform should look like, and is it ready to embrace the new technologies of AI, ML, inference-based models, etc., as deployment becomes more complex. And Devtron is a good answer to sort of give you a full-scale experience from the same set of users that are building software and deploying software, like users, application developers, DevOps, platform engineers, and infrastructure engineers.
All right. I want to shift gears to talk a bit about the solution that you already kind of described in your responses, that you built something that can abstract away all of the complexities of running a developer platform and make it so that there's fewer tools, but at the same time, there's no compromise on what you can and cannot do. And the different parts of the platform are easy to interchange if you need to, and mix and match. Sounds very exciting, sounds very interesting, and definitely something that I'm sure a lot of people listening and watching this, they want to know more about. So could you show us, this being a video podcast as well, could you show us about how this all looks in terms of what you built with Devtron, what kind of solution you built and how it fits together, and just show us something visually to help us understand all that you just explained.
Seeing is believing. It's like eating the pudding. Let me try and do a little quick, like a few minute demo of at least what it looks like so that folks can see a little bit.
Mhm.
Uh,
All right. Yeah, we see your screen.
you can see my screen. So this is actually on our website as well. I'll just do a little bit like a quick walkthrough of few screens of functionality that I actually explain, and this can put things in perspective. So this is what
Mhm.
you see the screen. And of course, this is a guided demo, but I'll take you through some of the actual screens and walk through. So as I said, I mean, we talked about who are the users of Devtron. Like it was developer productivity of DevOps and developers. So
Mhm.
how do both of these users come together on this pane of glass that that's looking in front of you. So for example, resource browser. So this is like the actual real dashboard of
Mhm.
Devtron field. We are very proud of the UX that we have built, and it's
Yeah,
been talked a
big
lot
fun.
about in many of the forums. So let's look at resource browser, for example. This is like your dashboard. This is like a far better version of Kubernetes dashboard. It's like a complete interface, which, this is where the DevOps can actually manage details of your Kubernetes cluster. I mean, you need a cluster to sort of, you need a dedicated Kubernetes cluster to install Devtron. And this is like your dashboard where you're actually seeing everything what is inside of a cluster, for example. If you go deeper, then these are the kind of objects you can view, you can edit. All the DevOps folks or the platform engineers you talked about can actually just go here and look at take action on this. This gives you a complete things on CPU, memory, storage, namespaces, complete cluster view of this. All your cluster can be managed from this single pane of glass, and you can see one single place where all your information about these clusters is very easily sort of manageable. Now, this is, once you kind of look at the cluster view, then you also want to add your main software, right? I mean, where do you start? You want to add your software, and we have deeply integrated with what is very popular in the build and deploy stage, or the deploy stage is called the Helm charts. So we have a very
Right. Yeah.
nuanced view. Sorry, is the question?
Oh, no, no, I was just saying, oh yeah, about Helm
Helm
charts
charts.
that you, yeah.
Absolutely. So this is the Helm store. So this is like a complete Helm store. Like you can look at individual applications or commonly used applications throughout best practices globally. And this is, imagine all of this is being accessed by the developers. They're easily allowed to modify each chart, go into each of these charts and then click, and then opens, and you can actually install software looking at all the variables, and very easily sort of navigate all of that. So this is interesting to see that most of this, the developers spend most of the times at the applications menu. And once you have the Helm charts figured out, you can immediately go to a developer to an application menu and immediately see that how you deploy that application. Now, take a look at that. Now, this is all the application is all the list of applications that a developer would want to now, let's say, deploy or build. And or this is also based on what you or you may not have access to. As I said initially, that you have a role-based access control, and very fine-grained one. Like you can actually define, even if you have the junior most developer coming in, you can actually from the day one give him or her an access to Devtron by only having a view-only access. Like let's take a quick look at the demo application. Now look at this beautiful screen where I'm sure you know about Dora metrics, etc., all of those kind of things. Like this is an application metrics where this is a complete health board of application status, whether the application is healthy or not, is the deployment succeeded or failed, what is the commit time, is there any blackout windows, are there any security vulnerabilities. It gives you a complete dashboard of, and of course the CPU, memory usage, throughput, etc. Key application metrics are already shown here. So very important screen from a developer standpoint, where one sees everything at a single point of click.
Mhm.
Though we'll talk about securities, DevSecOps and the sec in the DevSecOps is very, very fine-grained in Devtron again. Like this particular view shows you 61 vulnerabilities, two critical, two high, 21 medium, etc., where actually we interface with a common vulnerability databases. Like we use Claire, we use Trivy, and we can interface with any third-party uh, security posturing framework that you might have. And you can all bring it together on this dashboard with Devtron as well. So security, CrowdStrike example again, or anything else. And as you put security, um, posturing within your build and deploy process, all this can be very nicely integrated into Devtron, and you can actually have a integrated view of all of this. Look at these. Now, this is further peek into the vulnerability things. These are the various vulnerabilities coming in, and you can take a corrective action based on that, right?
Mhm.
Now, let's go to an overview screen as well, and let's see an application overview here. Again, this shows you what is the app configuration. You can see what are the, you can actually, from an application or a demo, this is just a demo application, you can actually identify application owners, links to various runbooks, any other information, all from an application standpoint, you can see here. You want to go deeper into the app configuration, you go there straight away and click on that. And this takes you to an actually the build part of the application, right? This is your workflow editor. Now look at the stages outlined very carefully, where we have also given what is called as the you know the place where you actually seek permissions, or you before you deploy, there are basic pipelines, and where you can configure environment, you can define your basic pipelines, and you have all these gated sort of things where you want to see that, can I, before deployment, can I have approval based mechanism? You don't want to deploy to a, let's say, a pre-prod stage or a prod stage unless there are X amount of approvers defined. This is an example of a complex organization where the guardrails have been defined, what you can approve, who can approve, and what others. Like in this case, there are only one number of approvals, right? So it can, again, you have an option of manually approving it, or you can also have an automatic approval here if you can just toggle off the button. And this examples also shows you a deployment side of the stage of Devtron, and this typically encapsulates very popular GitOps, right? It's very popular ways of deploying. GitOps is very well known. And here, this example, we are showing a rolling deployment. So as this is rolling, we can have various strategies. As I was saying initially, you can have canary, you can have blue green. In this case, this is an example of rolling. Similarly, we can, security policies. We talked about, these are the security policies that you can configure. Like we talked about security, and here you can define as many policies as you can possibly think of. And this is the last stop, and it's a very small, this is the resource watcher. It actually tells you the entire Kubernetes dashboard in terms of what are the intercepts, what are the changes, um, into the Kubernetes resource side of things. You can take one complete view of everything possible here, and from a tool chain point of view, it gives you one single platform or one single solution of everything that various users that you see, from an application deployer to a platform engineer to a security guy who can be a security champion inside the DevOps process, can also look at the same system and sort of define everything and guardrails and everything. So it's a I think it's almost a few minutes of so this, let me stop sharing this. I hope this was able to give you a good prelude
Yeah,
into various users, interfaces, the real screens, functionalities through the build and deploy
yeah,
and debug process.
yeah. It was quite an interesting demo, and I think yeah, great job, like you mentioned, with even just the layout. I think it's quite approachable, and I saw that there's a lot of simplifying in there, even in just what's possible and what you can do. So great job with just the UI and layout there.
Thank you.
Uh,
Thank you.
yeah, I want to ask your views on open source and just you mentioned Helm charts, and there's a bunch of open source projects you've been mentioning since we started talking, which, you mentioned Argo, Flux, Jenkins, so many of them. Uh, so talk to us about just open source and Devtron, how you've built on top of open source, how you contribute, your views on open source.
See, I think open source, Devtron is open source at the core, and that gave us a very good head start into a heavily populated tooling and infrastructure space, as I was talking about. Jenkins, Argo CD, all of these are fairly large. They've been around for years altogether. Very large community-based projects, and
Mhm.
continue to do so. We feel in the modern cloud native space, some of these tools or technologies have not been forthright and forthcoming in terms of, and that led to us thinking about, can we build on top of it while we don't have to reinvent things that have already beautifully been created by some of these tools. And that was the whole idea of starting open source with Devtron. The open source idea of Devtron was to actually spur developer self-serve, to be honest, where we felt that in any large organizations, developer interfacing with the SDLC and DevOps interfacing, or platform engineers with interfacing with SDLC is two different tasks. DevOps engineers' main work area or blast radius is production environment. And that's a high velocity, high impact zone of reference. So everything which happens in production is like the bread and butter of the company, right? I mean, that's what makes everything go. So they're very critical areas that you have to look there. You need to have well-defined roles, well-defined guardrails, well-defined systems, well-tested out systems, etc. Less
Mhm.
buggy, zero buggy, and everything should be prim and proper there. While in the build process or in the whole developer learning and building journey, you have more lax, sort of relatively laxer areas where you're debugging, there are bugs, they're fixing, there's Jira tickets, that's all of those kind of things. So I think our idea was of open source was to actually make the developer's journey, who's the source of, that's where the code sits and they build and then they actually put it in repos, etc., and the work starts there from there. I think their idea of our work was that let's make Kubernetes or anything which is modern kind of abstract for them. We build this through our open source system where we're saying the developers self-serve all the jobs that developer need to do in order to build or to deploy, for example, should be a cakewalk. They should not go to, there was a lot of hand holding between the developer and the DevOps. Hey, I've done this, now you do that. I have done that. So there's this back and forth, and that led to a lot of inefficiency in the system. The build times were higher. And since developers were more interested in the quality of the code, testing, and then checking it in, the DevOps is not interested in that. DevOps motivation is making sure the production environment is always ready and it delivers what it delivers. So I think there was also a lot of friction between these two things. And we thought, when we bring all of this together, how do we bring this together? Because if we can make the developers onboarding easier, and if we get that journey very, very seamless, and that is the reason for keeping many things open source, was to bring Kubernetes adoption, for example, at the forefront of developer learning process. We also thought, we looked at so many forums and it was talked about that Kubernetes is a complex beast. Then we also look at people, different ways of learning Kubernetes. Some were learning literally on the terminal, some were very pro with UX. And we decided, and we took an opinionated way of giving them a UI UX view to things. And within the UI UX, you can, and the beauty of Devtron is that you can actually launch a terminal through that as well if you're more comfortable there. So we put best of both worlds. We chose open source because we thought this is the most reduced, frictionless way of getting in front of people and also taking collective feedback. All this UI that you see has been built in the last 2-3 years because of the enormous amount of frictionless love that we've got and support and feedback that we've got from people at large. Otherwise, you will have to sell it to customers to be able to get feedback. Since selling is a different process and open source is more like thinking about adoption and developer self-serve, we got a lot of feedback. So we were very clear, this is the most easier and frictionless way of getting feedback, and this is how do we get roadmaps get defined. We also look at feedback coming in from all kinds of zones. Like we have 12,000 plus open source installations, equally from all different continents of US, Europe, Asia, and India. So which is a very healthy mix of getting all this feedback. From a commercial standpoint, an organization will take an X amount of time reaching into all geographies, having its all sales and GTM motions. So I think it's a good mix of both that we have tried as a strategy, and that seems to be working well from both learning as well and keeping the framework of open source in mind. So our open sourcing Devtron is coming from the fact of empowering the developers to use it. That is the hidden agenda there, rather than saying that, hey, we want to be very altruistic. This is for a larger good of the universe. While that is the truth, but it is more about here and now. Can I improve the life of a developer sitting in Bangalore and a large organization developer sitting in the US at the same time? And incrementally, I'm doing a greater good for, in general, as the developer community. So that's the genesis of open source.
Interesting. And as we wind down, I just wanted to get your views on just the tech community and the startup tech community in India. It's rare to see an Indian startup in this space, because most of the time, the organization starts and grows in the US and then has a back office, or the US or Europe or anywhere else, and then has a back office in India. And you see a lot of services startups in India, but I think a tech product startup is very rare. And that's what you guys are doing, and it's quite commendable. So I wanted to just get your view on this, on just the tech community in India, where it's at right now, coming from its history, how is it evolving, and where you see it going. Could you comment on some of that?
It's a good point, Twain. And I think over the last few years, you're right, India continues to be still behind in innovation. I think that is changing. You've more than 100 plus 106, 110 unicorns, all based in India. But I think the fact is, we still have more services than products, which is changing, but albeit at a slow pace. I think primary reason is that the consumption markets are not very large in India. That's why you'd see out of these 110 startups, and many of them, and I'm leaving aside the B2C startups that are completely homegrown and serving Indian community at large. I'm talking about B2B SaaS companies, dev tools companies, infrastructure software companies that are being Indian founders, but they are built for the world, and they are, more often than not, they immediately start here, raise money, and then go to US, because that's US and rest of India is where the biggest market lies. India still is not very close to incentivizing enough for software development because of the hangover of services that we have, right? Is the cost plus model. We still are not very value driven. We still are very cost driven. I think that is beginning to change, but it'll take a long time. And that is the biggest challenge. I think Indian software consumers, or the large companies which are large companies in India, which are buyers of Indian software, for example, or which are buyers of software of any sort. I think if the mindset shifts from them buying Indian software, or which is the Indian founders built software, and pay, if not exactly what they pay the foreign software vendors, almost at par, then I think this trend will start to shift, where you will see build in India and deploy in India phenomena, rather than build in India and deploy for the world, which is great because you're exporting more software. But then I think this trend of having an equilateral, equitable equilibrium of having users and getting paid users here as well as paid users outside will shift. So I think that's the challenge, and that challenge is more, I mean, it has roots into the way, I mean, it'll get philosophical into the way education system has been there. It is deeply connected with entrepreneurship in general, which we have seen in the last 10 years has a dramatic shift. And the next 10 to 20 years, you will see a monumental shift in that as well. But I think for the immediate future, you will still see SaaS companies selling outside of, especially the funded SaaS companies selling outside of India because of the reasonable pressure of venture building, getting to revenue faster, and building value for the shareholders. And I think it's a mix of both of these things, but you're seeing some early trends of people paying for software in India, but it's still very early. So that's the biggest challenge. And I think as long as we are building original stuff into India and still serving the world, I wouldn't be too concerned with that fact as long as it's being built in India. And that has been globally acceptable norm of many such companies, even foreigners who are building outside. I mean, who started the companies outside, but still choosing to have India as their back-end product engineering think tank, which is a great journey from pure services background that we started.
Mhm. Yeah, and this year also the CNCF has announced there's going to be a KubeCon
You've gone
in
in
December
Delhi
happening
actually in
in
December.
Delhi, the first time in India.
That's a big
So
deal, and let's see how that pans out. Very keen to sort of see what's the participation, what kind of
mm,
people come in, and what's the whole frame. It's a big deal. I mean, they've never done that such a large scale event in India.
yeah, yeah. I hope it'll be at least a fraction of a good fraction of the Ambani wedding we just had last month.
Absolutely. It's difficult
Should
to beat
probably
that thunder unless you have all the sympathy pour into CNCF as well and get to our boring world of infrastructure and software development.
we should hire some of those acts
For
from
those
there.
influences, absolutely.
Yeah. Uh, well, it's a pleasure chatting with you, Rajesh. We've run out of time now, but it'll be great to definitely have you over for a part two sometime down the line. If you launch any new feature or something big drops at Devtron, definitely come by and tell us about it. Um,
Absolutely. It'll be a pleasure. And thank you for having me, Twain. Lovely talking to you guys. And whoever is listening, check us out on devtron.ai. We're making some very cool stuff there that changes almost every fortnight. Give us your support. Tell us how we are building. We'll be happy to sort of learn from you. Thank you very much.
yeah, before you go, Rajesh, just one question.
Sure.
Uh, well, what's your favorite way to engage with the tech community in India to kind of get to know you a bit more?
I think I'm very heavy on LinkedIn. I am there's no other social media I use. I do a very selective Twitter, but I think a little bit Twitter, but I think LinkedIn is, I can reach out directly to me. My email is rajesh@devtron.ai. LinkedIn, otherwise, drop me a message on LinkedIn. And then I mean, in general, do a lot of meetups, webinars, and stuff. I mean, at least from that standpoint, I'm very happy to help anyone.
Yeah, but I was more curious to know, like, if you want to know, like, what's happening in the dev space in India, like, if you want to, like, meet and talk to people in the space in India, where do you go? Do you go to events or do you check out forums? Or
Events and
where?
forums. There are a lot of these local events in Bangalore, Delhi, and all cities in India have these local forums. We are very vocal and as well as very common in some of these forums. These are very hyper local sort of things. There's no massive like a CNCF type event here yet. But it's very
Mhm.
fragmented between Hyderabad. I mean, if you talk about India, in Hyderabad, Bangalore, Delhi, NCR, where almost it covers 90% of the whole software development and a little bit of Pune as well. Bombay comes perhaps the last in all of these cities. And I think these host very local forums and meetups. And you can find a whole lot of learning and folks trying to get there and learn from each other.
Hmm. All right, interesting. Great. That was a wonderful chat. Thanks so much, Rajesh, for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. All the best.
Thanks to all of our listeners and viewers, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, guys. Thank you. Bye.